My guest at this time is Virginia Republican delegate Nick Freitas, who is also running for Congress in the Commonwealth's 7th Congressional District this year. On Wednesday, he was sworn in for another term in the Virginia House of Delegates, but the session promises to be very different from anything he's seen in Richmond during his first couple of terms. Today, Democrats took over the majorities in the House of Delegates and the state Senate, and they are vowing to move forward on a very ambitious progressive agenda. So, what exactly can we expect? Delegate Freitas, always good to have you, sir. Thanks for your time.
No, great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have all these questions about the Democratic agenda, but from what we're seeing today, things are kind of in limbo. Even though today's the day the Democrats took charge, they're not quite sure how they want to structure things, apparently.
Yeah, there seems to be some problems. They haven't actually agreed on the rules at this point. They haven't given the rules over to the Republicans at this point, so we can actually discuss it at this point. And where we're currently at, without the rules, it drastically affects the way that we can do business within the House. It affects whether or not we actually have committee assignments. It affects even whether the governor can come down and provide the State of the Commonwealth address at this point. So we're definitely running into some issues right there. They're having some difficulty figuring out the administrative components of actually running the legislature.
Well, it's roughly a 60-day session. It can obviously be extended, but a 60-day session, and given what they want to enact here, a couple of days delay probably isn't the worst thing you've ever seen.
No, when you look at the extreme left-wing policy positions that they're trying to put out, gridlock would actually be a blessing for the Commonwealth at this point.
Well, let's look at this because it's a long laundry list of what they say they want to do. They want to enact gun control legislation. They want to revive the Equal Rights Amendment. They want to work on voting issues, minimum wage increases, environmental restrictions, more permissive abortion laws, and more than that. What do you expect here in the next couple of months? Are we going to start off with the gun issue, or what else is likely to come down the pike first at you?
Well, I think, like you said, the gun legislation is going to be the ones that they actually push for very hard. We're going to see some of the most radical abortion bills that we've ever seen in the Commonwealth of Virginia, even more so than what we saw last year. There was recently a bill dropped that would essentially make it illegal to have an indoor range in Virginia unless it's owned by the Commonwealth. And then as you look at some of the economic policy, when it comes to things like drastically increasing the minimum wage, which would have really detrimental effect for small business, more business regulations, $500 million at least in new taxes, just across the board. It is a grab bag of, well, again, I would describe as extreme left-wing policy objectives, and I think we're going to see all of it. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot that we can do from a legislative standpoint to fight it. We simply don't have the votes. We are going to have to challenge some of this in court, especially some of the gun legislation, as I believe it's blatantly unconstitutional.
Talk a little bit more about the gun issue. That's the first I've heard that they want to ban indoor ranges, which I'm pretty sure would be most of them, if in fact the Commonwealth didn't own them. There's also been some back and forth on confiscation and retroactive banning. It seemed at first that the Democrats wanted to go back and basically confiscate weapons that are deemed illegal, even if they were bought legally at the time. Now I'm hearing that they'll grandfather in folks who own AR-15s and other things they consider assault weapons, but they might come after you if you have magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. So where are they settling on an actual piece of legislation here?
I think the problem that we're running into, and we're seeing repeatedly, is that there's what they want to do, which is gun confiscation, and then there's what they actually have the constitutional authority to do, and really just the practical ability to do. And so when you hear them talk about trying to move it from gun confiscation to gun registration, that's not because they've given up on confiscation. They just understand that both from a political standpoint and a practical standpoint, they probably can't achieve that at this point. And that's the problem that they're running into. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that even if it looks like they're backing away from some of this, it's far more likely that they're simply trying to hedge their bets.
You mentioned $500 million in new taxes. What taxes exactly do they want to go after?
Well, one of them is going to be the gas tax, which is obviously something that's going to be able to affect everybody in the Commonwealth. So I think that's one that people are going to have a lot of frustration with. I think the other important thing to understand is that some of these tax increases that you see in the governor's budget are just the tip of the iceberg. Once delegates start proposing their budget amendments and bills, there's going to be other tax increases that they're going to be insisting on as well. To give you an idea, we had taxes suggested last year that I expect to see back this year, ones that were taxes on everything from plastic bags at the grocery store to watercraft to Netflix and other sort of online vendors. So I think that bottom line is it goes back to Reagan's old adage is that, if it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. And we'll probably see that reflected in not only the current governor's budget, but in the legislation and tax legislation that we see coming from our colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle.
A long, broad list of things that the Democrats want to get done. Is there anything on their list that you in good conscience can get behind?
Well, actually, I've carried a couple of pieces of legislation that Democrats have approached me on that they like. Some of it has to do with civil asset forfeiture reform. Others has to do with ensuring that we make it easier for people to engage in the cultivation of industrial hemp here in Virginia. These are issues that I've worked on for years in the General Assembly. And we're at a point right now where the bottom line is that even though I've carried this legislation for the last 3 years, it would probably be better at this point if I handed it off to one of my Democrat colleagues, allowed them to carry it and get it done. And ultimately, that's the most important thing, is getting good policy passed. So I'm happy to work with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to get them that legislation and hopefully get it shepherded through the General Assembly this session.
This is the first time you'll be in the minority. I believe it's a 10-vote majority for the Democrats in the House, 55-45. So you'd need to flip 5 or 6 Democrats on any vote that you would want to win. And it's 21-19 in the Senate. What can Republicans actually do in opposition to a lot of these items?
I think some of the more extreme policy positions that we're seeing from an economic standpoint, whether, again, it's regulations that would drastically harm small business, whether it's getting rid of right to work, I think those are things where you might see some compromise or pushback, especially in the Senate. And so I could see some of those bills potentially getting, amended to look very different from the way that they've been submitted or perhaps dying on the floor over there. However, when it comes to some of the gun legislation, I mean, that's been carried by people that I would have argued were far more reasonable and less animated when it came to being anti-gun. But we have some Democrats on both the House side and the Democrat side that are scared of getting a primary challenge from the left, and so this is the way that they signal to their base that they're with them. So it's going to be interesting to see. My concern is that we are going to see a lot of anti-gun legislation going through. We're probably going to see some pretty radical regulatory policy going through, abortion policy. We may be able to hold the line on some of the economic policies by getting some Democrats who, at least understand that, we don't want a centrally planned economy or for the government to seize the means of production. I think we need those people to work with us to push back on some of the more extreme policies. But the thing that we need to understand is, people, we have a Virginia right now that is number one in business in the country, where we've done a lot of great things on a number of issues, where we have one of the lowest crime rates of any state, and we've done that by protecting the Second Amendment, not infringing upon it. We have a AAA bond rating. We've done a great job with respect to many aspects of our budgeting. That's the Virginia that we have handed over to this Democrat-controlled legislature and Democrat-controlled government at the executive level as well. And we'll see what they do with it. But over the next 2 years, if the legislation that they're currently carrying is any indication, I think it's highly unlikely that we continue to keep, some of those high marks that we've received as a place to raise a family, start a business, and be successful.
Well, let me tie this into your congressional campaign as we exit here, Delegate Freitas. Obviously, it's, like I said at the beginning, an ambitious, progressive agenda here. Is this simply a vision of where the Democratic Party is in Virginia, or do you think the agenda that's headed your way in Richmond is pretty much what's headed for the American people if the Democrats were to win back the White House and the Congress?
No, I think what we're seeing right now is a reflection of the direction the Democratic Party as a whole wants to go, and you see that with the comments that Bernie Sanders makes, AOC, Elizabeth Warren. It doesn't matter, where it's coming from. The thought leaders within the Democratic Party are all pushing for a much more, I wouldn't even say liberal agenda. I think it's much more of an authoritarian agenda. Because when your solution to every problem is to give the government more authority over your health care, more authority over education, more authority over gun rights, more authority over the economy, I mean, what do you call that? I don't call that liberal. I call that authoritarian. And it may be coming from a place where they honestly believe that if only they had more power and more control, they could make things better. But I believe that's antithetical to human freedom. And so we have to start making an argument, not just a good social or economic argument for what it is that we believe when we talk about individual liberty, free markets, property rights. We have to make a better moral argument about that. And I think we have an obligation to send more people up to Washington, D.C. that understand that voting correctly and carrying good legislation is the bare minimum that we should be able to expect out of our legislators. We need people that are going to go up there and actually make the argument, because I find that we have a number of people that in our school systems and higher education, and when it comes to the media, when it comes to pop culture, they've never really heard a good argument for what it is we believe. And I think it's imperative that we actually provide one.
Delegate Freitas, a busy day and a busy stretch ahead, not only with the business in Richmond, but the campaign, of course, as well. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Thank you very much, Greg. My pleasure.
You bet. Republican Delegate Nick Freitas, also running for Congress in Virginia's 7th Congressional District this year. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.